How do China's young professionals think? Those born in the 1980s, those now beginning their careers. They have lived through China's remarkable transformation. What are their experiences? How do they view China's changes and challenges? China's accomplishments and problems? What about China's new position in the world? Are young people patriotic, nationalistic? They grew up as a single child. What's their opinion of the two-child policy that's new? How do they forecast the future? What about their hopes and dreams, their fears and doubts? I speak with 5 up-and-coming Chinese professionals from the media. They want to tell the world about the China they know. Let's see how the new generation brings us closer to China.
People born in the 1980s will probably be the last generation of only children in Chinese history. That's because after over 35 years of the one-child policy, all couples are now allowed to have 2 children. In 1979, concerned that the country's increasing population would spiral out of control, the Chinese government instituted the one-child policy. China has the largest population in the world, which was considered a burden to economic development. By strictly implementing the one-child policy, China stabilized its population, which now stands at a little over 1.3 billion, and succeeded in its development. But times have changed and demographic problems emerged. Now China faces a growing gender imbalance. For every 100 girls born in China, there are 115 boys. Due to China's traditional bias towards male offspring, some parents undergo gender-specific abortions. In addition, China's population is aging while the labor force is shrinking. This means there won't be enough young people to care for the elderly. Beginning this year, the Chinese government relaxed its one-child policy, allowing couples to have a second child. The new policy is expected to help stabilize China's population at about 1.5 billion, a level that can facilitate coordinated economic and social development. Now China's generation of only children faces a choice. Are they going to have a second child?
Kuei, are you only child?
Yes, I am only child in my family. I'm from Gansu province in the west part of China. And growing up, I always wanted a brother or sister, but I never had, because I always envied my neighbor, my schoolmates. They have brothers, they have sisters, they have their playmates, but I always feel a little bit lonely there. So I always grew up envy them. But now I think we get a chance to have second child.
With the new policy.
Yeah.
Kuei,
I'm an only child, and almost all my family members, they're all one child. So unlike Yi, I've never felt lonely because I don't know what that means. You know what? Because I've never had brothers, and I know my parents, they have brothers and sisters. And we learned this word, English word, brother and sisters, from a textbook. We were like 13 years old, but I thought I had brothers and sisters, but it turned out it was cousins. So it's okay. Being a single child, as one child, is cool.
You can now have 2. And so, what has been the reaction among, you guys are young and in the childbearing ages, and so this affects you. What, how does everybody reacting to that?
I'm not married, and I have no children, of course, definitely. Alert, single ladies here. Okay, so I think I welcome the policy very much, because from the family angle, I think it's good. From my personal experience, I always wanted brother or sister. So I think having a second child in the family, as we said before, they can compete and they can care for each other. I think that's a good thing. And also from a larger picture, I think, because I read a few data a few days ago, I come across some data. They said China's, the demographic dividend of China is coming to an end, and in a few years' time, the labor force will not be sufficient as it were. So I think having more children, given the policy is a policy, I think people will have more children, so that in the future the labor force will be enough, so that we can keep the momentum for development.
This is an important national point, and other countries have faced it. Russia has faced it, Japan has faced it with declining populations, etc. But there's a fundamental question here that says, what is the human right of a family versus the collective state right?
I have a boy. who's 1 year and 7 months old. And exactly, we're thinking about having a second baby. Not because of, for the state's sake, but for the family. Like Yi said, I want my child, my boy, to have a brother or sister in the future, to have a company when they grow up. That's just a very small, expectation, a dream, because I didn't have one. So I want him to enjoy this period of life. And, it's easier to say. It's always good to have a second option or another choice that you could have 2 children, not just the one.
Is this a significant change, the role of women in the world, which will affect the birth rate, even if you're allowed to have 2 children? Yi?
I think having more working women nowadays is not mutually exclusive to, having second child or having more children there. Because I think nowadays, so many, as you mentioned, many young couples, they live with very advanced thinking of living. For example, like think couples, double income, no kids. So it's of course it's their choice. So I think having more working women is not mutually exclusive to it. Actually, China, I think the policy there, from what I know, that the policy or the regulations guarantee that working women have enough time to care for their children. For example, the maternity leave or the breastfeeding leave like that. I don't think this is mutually exclusive to having more children.
No, certainly not mutually exclusive, but will the fact that there are so many working women lower the likely number of couples that are having second child? So perhaps the demographic impact may not be as much as some people think, because they're not factoring in the changing sociology of Chinese society.
It's a hard
Also the
thing.
expense. What about the expense?
The expense is great. It's incredibly high now. There are netizens, they do some calculation about having a second baby, or raise first one, from different peers of the city, from the Beijing, Shanghai, probably would cost you 2 million yuan, renminbi, to raise a baby till he's graduated from university, 21 years old. From, I don't know, it's a third or fourth tier of the city, so it probably cost you like 600,000 renminbi. How many years for the parents to make those money? I mean, the net worth, okay? It's not like you have to cost every day, right? Buy things. Can you afford it? It's very realistic.
No doubt the 2-child policy is what the Chinese people are talking about. Actually, since China's reform and opening up, the Chinese people have witnessed dramatic changes in their daily lives. What about the personal experiences of young professionals? That's next.
After nearly 4 decades of reform and opening up, the once agrarian China has become the world's 2nd largest economy and the largest holder of foreign currency reserves. With rapid and steady economic growth, millions of Chinese have been lifted out of poverty. Half of the population now lives in cities. Farmers no longer pay agricultural taxes, and Social Security covers almost 1 billion people. Despite these changes, China still confronts seemingly intractable problems, especially income inequality and a massive urban-rural gap in living standards. The country also faces challenges in improving healthcare, education and housing, and reducing pollution. With more diverse and conflicting interests in society, China's leadership committed in 2013 to further deepen reform in all sectors. Having lived through the drastic changes brought by reform and opening up, the young generation shares their observations and experiences.
Let's talk about the dramatic changes in China during the period of reform and development. Normally when I talk to people, there are people who are older in their 60s and who can reflect back on the days, even during the Cultural Revolution. But your generation is different. You sort of emerged in this last final spurt of this huge growth and development. What are your first early memories? What kind of life did you have at the time?
Well, I was born in 1983, and actually the starting point of my memory, I think it was in 1986. My grandfather, holding my hand, took me to my parents, my family's new apartment. Yeah, that's the starting point of my whole memory. And
It's a new apartment.
It's a new apartment, and for me, I was 3 years old, and it's so huge for me, and everything's so bright, so clean, and I think it's, back then I thought it was so modernized, because when I was older, my parents took me to little room they rented on suburb of the city. It was really underdeveloped. So comparing to that, it's a huge development. It's very vivid, the first impression of my family's first apartment.
My parents and my grandparents would sometimes mention those memories. For example, my mom was born in a Midwest village in China, and she grew up really poorly. So she always talked about when she was a child, if she has this little part of pig oil, the oil extracted from boiled pig fat, and with a big bowl of whether it's rice or other grain, she would be so happy. Yeah. And they could rarely eat meat, maybe only during Spring Festival. And she said she's never drank any other beverage other than water, no milk.
How about the social structure of society? The transformation from what was a planned economy, the so-called iron rice bowl, which meant when you have your job, that's it, you know what your life is, you have no stress, you just know what you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
And now you're in a market economy, a lot of uncertainty, society is different. Have you seen that change over your lifetime?
Oh yes, actually my aunt's husband was laid down during that period. He lost his job, but he went into business and he worked as a driver, and he earned quite a lot of money during that time. Although lost their iron bowl, but they have more opportunities, new opportunities, because of the opening up and more market economy.
Seeing these material changes and changes of information, have they had any impact on how you deal with society or how you observe society?
Me observing society, I think for people at my same age, the communication between friends and people in the same age group, I think part of this used to be real communication has gone into a virtual way, because we now have this mobile technology. So I think interpersonal exchanges have partially gone virtual.
For me, my memory is my grandpa and my grandfather and my father used to rode a bicycle to take me to school. And then I have my own bicycle. And then I could take a bus or subway to go to school. And my father later had his own private car, and he drove me to school after that, drove me to college and to high school.
And this is all within one lifetime?
He had a private car in the last 15 years, I think. Yeah.
How much has the impact of social media been on your lives?
I think it changed changed people's mentality in two significant ways. First is the method of acquiring information, because now, as we both started working in traditional media organizations, and we all feel this challenge, because when a certain news event happened at a place, especially a place far away, it usually first breaks out on social media rather than traditional media organizations. And this has significantly changed the old mentality. When people are trying to get information, they look to all the prestigious media organizations to turn on the TV or turn on the radio. This has totally changed. So as a media worker, I think we all feel very, very much challenged. This is the first. And second is how people express their ideas or their thinking, because there used to be, I think due to the technological obstacles, it's not very easy for people in China back in the 1990s even to express their ideas to the outside, to people outside their daily circle. You can talk to your family, you can talk to your friends, but that's basically the daily boundary there. But now people can use like Weibo or very much Weibo and other kind of social platforms. They can say whatever they want, and maybe a follower of yours could be in another country.
What would you like China to be at the culmination of your careers, or when you reach the point of maximum responsibility, maybe in 30 years from now, or whenever, by mid-century, really, when China is achieving the second part of the Chinese dream in terms of a fully modernized country? What would you like China to be like at that time, compared to today?
Yeah, well, China has always been a culture that emphasizes on unity. But I think we should also learn from the Western experience, which is to taking more criticism and think constructively based on that. So I would like to see that China being able to receive more criticism and being able to correct itself, to draw more better experience. Also, I would like to see that China sharing its old wisdom, traditional wisdom, going back thousands of years to the world. And there's not enough of that nowadays.
Well, personally, I think China is on the right path to future development and prosperity. I think, for me, what I would wish is that the future development of China would offer more opportunities for average people to really benefit from China's prosperity in the future. I think that's also the point of China's reform and opening up.
China's reform and opening up has not only transformed China domestically, but also internationally. China has become the second largest economy. The entire world respects China's achievements. The Chinese people, especially young people, are rightfully proud of their country. They are patriotic. But when does patriotism mutate into nationalism? We discuss China's international image. That's next. We're still dealing with the greater the information as access today on the internet, with a negative, increasing negative image of China. So what can China do to counteract that?
I think catch up is the key word here. You should better connected to the world with the correct information on China and valuable and responsible opinion from from the Chinese people and people who are really interested in China and trying to have a constructive discussion on specific issues of China, just like what you've been doing, Robert.
To counter the negative points, we need to know why this difference comes from. The developing countries in China, I think they share common experience, more experience to be shared. For example, the experience of development, fighting poverty, fighting against colonialism. So the developing countries, they are, seeing China, viewing China with more interest on an equal foot. But developed countries, they do not have much intensive to care about China. I think some of them even would like to regard China on a superior position based on the values. So translation of the language is important, but translation of the values is very, very difficult.
And what are some of those different values?
Maybe some people I do not mean all the people, I mean some people in the developed countries, they may put more emphasis on the so-called human rights, democracy, the freedom. They think they are standing on a moral high ground. So when they take this holier-than-you attitude towards China based on the standard of their own values, maybe there are kind of pride and prejudice or misunderstanding. So that's a very, very tough job for China to communicate its own values with these developed countries.
What does it mean in China today to be a patriot? How is patriotism defined in today's China?
I think first you know your country well, and when you are asked about the status quo, or you are asked to make a judgment on your country's future, you can make a reasonable, rational, and convincing explanation to your own judgment. And of course, you have to dedicate yourself to the cause of China's development.
For the young people in China to be patriotic means they contribute to the revival of China, so that the country cannot be bullied again, as in the past 100 or 150 years. So it does not imply any hatred or hostility toward other countries. Just devote yourself to the peaceful development of the own country. Yeah.
Would a Chinese patriot, for example, talk candidly about China's problems with foreigners?
I think the way we put it should be more constructively. So you talk about the country's problems, you're not complaining. That's why I said you have to know your country well. You're not complaining about your personal condition or complaining, or you just complain based on some things you have heard or read which may not be true.
Okay, so you want to tell the truth, but and you don't want to complain, but you can criticize.
Yeah.
Some
in a constructive way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes we complain about, for example, the environment, some policies, but the basic point is we can do something to improve these problems. So it doesn't. No country is perfect. China has lots of problems. No complaint, no improvement.
What do you see in terms of this sense of asserting China's position, or defending China's rights, or rectifying the century of humiliation and not letting something happen again? I mean, how much of this is resonant in the younger generation?
Well, I think the history is very deep in the mindset of the young generation. But it does not mean that the young generation, while they are being patriotic or nationalism, they are having hatred towards other countries who humiliated China in the past century. So the thing is, I give you one example. I went to interview in northeast China during the May of this year. You know the northeast China's history. In 1945, when the Japanese invaders were defeated during the Second World War, they left behind more than 1 million Japanese immigrants to the northeast China. And those people must be returned back to their hometown, to their home country. So the China had to help them, to get on board and go to Japan. But these Japanese immigrants suffered very poor conditions. They didn't have money. They lost almost everything. But local people, Chinese people there, provided food, hot water, and money, any help they could give to help those Japanese immigrants. And there were lots of thousands of children, Japanese children, who were left behind. Some of them have become orphans because their parents were soldiers, maybe, who died in the war. They were raised and adopted and raised by the Chinese families. But these families, their brothers and sisters or their children were killed in the war. So for the young people nowadays, we cannot fully understand how these Chinese families felt at that time while giving help to the Japanese people. But I talked with many young people in the northeastern provinces, and most of them, I think 90% of them, replied that I would, make the same choice as our forefathers, without any hatred. Just you can be patriotic. You love your own country, but do not hate the other countries. I think this is a major majority or mainstream opinion among the Chinese people. And also we have lots of discussion about China's relations with other countries which used to invaded China. There's lots of hot discussion about how China needs to react to some issues. The Chinese government and the Chinese authorities, they just played a role as a kind of giving them a channel to express their emotions, and these emotions do not, cause or result in any riots or any how to say, the irrational activities. Some of them were controlled, some of them were discussed, and the young people said, okay, we cannot do this. They control themselves without the interference from the government.
Let's say I have a very simplistic, naive view of China, and it's a negative one. I met some person recently on a television shoot, and he was an American worker and working, and he basically made a comment that China's taking over the whole world. And I said, well, why do you think so? He said, well, everything China does, I mean, there are more people, everything, they're taking over the whole world. And I said, I know China pretty well, and they have a lot of problems in China. He said, really? They have problems? I said, yeah. I said, even more problems than I think we have here in your city. He says, wow. He says, that's good. And I said, why is it good? It's not good that they have problems. If they have problems, they're going to buy less stuff, and it's going to be worse for us. We want them to do well. So that was the kind of conversation I was having. So if you meet that, and pretend I'm that person, what do you want me to know? What will you start telling me first about China so that it would correct my misunderstanding?
Well, I think the best way is that if you've never been to China, you've never talked to a Chinese citizen or a Chinese, then I think that's where you should start with. Go to China, feel the country, get a sense of the country firsthand.
Okay, look, that's very good, but I want to do it in the next hour while we're having coffee. I can't wait till next year when I'm going to go to China. I want you to help me right now.
Why not just look at me? I'm China. I was born in an ordinary Chinese family. My father, he's employed in a company. My mother is a housewife. My wife is also a kind of a journalist. So we are a very ordinary Chinese family. So this is a story about a Chinese people that represents the experience of tens of thousands or millions of Chinese people. So I have a growing pain. I have some problems in my daily life. I have some achievements through my own efforts. So all these problems are related to China's, the entire country.
To those who are not familiar with China, the most remarkable thing about these young Chinese media professionals may be how similar they are to their peers in other countries. To those who are familiar with China, this is no surprise. They want to succeed in their careers, they want a good life for their families. They recognize China's problems, but believe they will be solved or ameliorated. They see continuous, if uneven, progress and are optimistic about the future. They are patriotic, proud that China has developed so rapidly and is now respected so widely. They are, of course, urban professionals and media savvy, hardly a random sample of the population. 25 years from now, this is the cohort, the age group, who will be running the country. Speaking to them now shows how they think. That's good to know, to keep closer to China.